So something about me is I have a lot of interests, from cooking to photography to music to film to even a little bit of history and philosophy. And over the pandemic, my attention has been turned to street photography. So my curiosity perked up when I saw in a magazine a documentary about street photography called Everybody Street by photographer and filmmaker Cheryl Dunn. I got kind of excited, like, oh, whole documentary about street photography. Now, that documentary covered various street photographers, each with their own unique style and philosophy to art. But one character stood out to me in particular, Ricky Powell. Now, every time he's on screen, he's charismatic and talks in a New York, old school New York sort of accent. So when I found out he was the subject of his own documentary called The Individualist, I knew this was something that I had to watch. So that's what today's video is really all about. Ricky Powell and The Individualist, and all about, the street art scene and sort of old school New York. Ricky Powell, the Individualist, is an American photographer. He likes to call himself the lazy hustler, which, is a great alias. The intro shows Ricky in his rundown New York City apartment grabbing his Minolta film camera before heading out to the street to take pictures, or flicks, as Ricky likes to call them. So right away, the audience is transported into the chaos that is the life of Ricky Powell. Now, at one point in the doc, Ricky is referred to as an authentic New York City street kid that just happened to be good with a camera and was down with a variety of different subcultures that happened to be popular at the time. And this is really kind of seen throughout the documentary. Ricky Powell was well known for, his connection to the hip hop world, but like Fab Five Freddy, who I spoke of in my video review of the book Three Kings, which you could also check out on this channel, he had a connection to the art world as well. And it's really interesting kind of seeing them as compatriots. One of Ricky's most infamous shots is a doorstop of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol, who famously collaborated. Now, how did Ricky Powell achieve this monumental shot? Well, he befriended Basquiat when he was working a blue-collar job at a frozen lemonade stand. And, just like that, he had the opportunity, just by being in New York, to take this great photo, just by being at the scene. And at the stand, he would go on to take famous photos, including a solo shot of Basquiat interacting with him. I think he was giving him change for, the frozen lemonade. So like Fab Five Freddy, who became friends with Ricky, he had a connection to that art world in 1970s New York, and the two would chat about the culture of the day. And, obviously, like when Ricky was a younger man, Ricky was kind of hip. He had access to all the happening spots like the Roxy and Danceteria, which became icons of New York City in their own right. I know the Beastie Boys, for example, definitely mentioned Danceteria. Like I'm almost positive that comes up in different biographies of them. So eventually Ricky went on to work for Paper Magazine and the East Village Voice. But believe it or not, it wasn't his media privileges that gave him access. No, it was his demeanor of being just an authentic street kid, true blue hip hop fan that really allowed him access. He was really immersed in the culture. So Ricky Powell had the advantage of being in the right place at the right time. And this is epitomized by his public access show, Rappin' with the Brickster. Ricky became a well-known figure within the hip hop community, befriending artists like Chuck D from Public Enemy. I think it was he mostly friends with Adrock from the Beastie Boys and Run-DMC, and he had also took famous photos of Run-DMC as well. Raising Hell tour, he was on the Raising Hell tour. So the Beastie Boys he became so close with, he went on tour with them. And yes, he was part of the License to Ill tour and was even referenced on the song Car Thief on Paul Boutique. And as with the Beasties, Ricky Powell was also influenced by skateboard culture, which was also, kind of seeing its peak in, I would say, like the late 70s. And this is seen through his stylistic choices with the use of a fisheye lens for portraits. And there's a Check Your Head video, I think is the Beastie video that uses that style. And that's borrowed from skateboard culture. Now, vibing with the subject, it made it easier for Ricky to be a fly in the wall, which is what allowed him to take such great behind the scenes candid photos. And that's kind of how he developed his style. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this doc is actually the subplot of Ricky being somewhat of a hoarder. Well, okay, not somewhat of a hoarder, but totally a hoarder. And it's something I can personally relate to with family members experiencing similar issues. If you know anything about hoarding, you probably know that hoarding can be hereditary. And this is kind of alluded to in the doc, where they don't really say Ricky's mom was a hoarder. They just kind of say that she had issues. And Ricky discusses how he grew up with his mother Ruth in New York City, mentioned living with a bunch of dogs and how the dogs kind of took precedence over Ricky and were often treated better than him and had, better food than Ricky to eat for, his adolescent life or whatever, And this tumultuous upbringing had a huge impact on Ricky's life. Ricky ended up with addiction issues, and thanks to his party hard lifestyle and inner demons, it became a dangerous concoction. So while he may have been that cool homeboy who was liked by everybody, eventually addiction got the better of Ricky for a bit, and he started turning on his friends while in the throes of addiction. At this point in the doc, things take a turn. While interview subjects that had, previously celebrated Ricky for being a wild character and told stories of his mishaps, there is kind of a pregnant pause from several of the interview subjects, warning of friends who they had known flew too close to the sun. And you start thinking as an audience member, like, oh no, is this what's going to happen to Ricky? And that's, it kind of, there is kind of foreshadowing there. But we then see sort of a renaissance period where Ricky's kind of getting his stuff together. Sadly, just as Ricky was getting his shit together by hiring a photography assistant who he allowed to help him clean the apartment, Ricky developed a heart condition, and shortly after he died. So he didn't really out and out die from the drugs, but sort of like as the aftermath of the drug use. He had also recently reconnected with his mother, and at the very least, it felt like he got some closure, and the doc does cover that. Ricky was also working on a new book during the shooting of the documentary, and there were kind of, loose ends that had to be tied up. And there is a story recounted about Ricky trying to charge clients exorbitant amounts of money and him even taking back pieces he had donated to galleries. Now, people who had helped Ricky initially catapult from being a no-name photographer to a celebrated star in the New York art scene. You certainly feel pity towards Ricky, a talented guy who never really got to live out to his full potential. Ricky is a tragic figure. That's kind of the bottom line. Behind all the bravado was a sensitive artist who was his own worst enemy. We as an audience certainly feel pathos towards Ricky, the individualist. At times a loose cannon, and at others a creative force to be reckoned with. If you even have a passing interest in street photography, I implore you to watch this documentary. And if you're somebody like me who's really interested in the origins of hip-hop and really love hip-hop culture, b-boy culture, graffiti culture, then this is a documentary you don't want to miss.